This Saturday, the 19th ranked 4-0, 1-0 in Big Ten Conference play, Illinois Fighting Illini, take the road to Beaver Stadium to face off against the 9th ranked 3-0, yet to play a conference game, Penn State Nittany Lions, and what I am dubbing to be a wannabe whiteout game. For the reason that this is not Penn State's official whiteout game of the year. That looks to be against Washington, could be another home game, and ideally you want it to be against Ohio State. And depending on how the Big Ten shakes out from here until late October when the game is played, it's possible. But James Franklin made it clear on Twitter that regardless, he wants the fans to act like this is a whiteout game. So this 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time performance that will be streamed on NBC is going to be fun. It's going to be rowdy. It's going to be loud. The student section, as always, is going to just project and exude this awesome, hyped up, strong energy. And having been to Beaver Stadium before, I can tell you it's an intimidating environment no matter what. And a night game feel, a whiteout feel only adds on to Penn State's home field advantage. That's why the Nittany Lions opened up as a 17.5 point favorite. It quickly jumped to 19.5. I think it came down a half point to 19. The Nittany Lions are currently favored by 19 points at home. Illinois getting 19 on the road. Penn State won this game 30-13 in 2023. The last time these two teams met up in Beaver Stadium, though, was the infamous 20-18 9 overtime Illinois win. So you know that's on Penn State's fans and team's mind. It's on James Franklin's mind. You know that's also probably something that maybe Illinois is using as a motivator for their own team. But regardless, that was then, and this game is now a top 20 Big Ten Conference matchup in Beaver Stadium. Illinois coming off of a 31-24 overtime win in a top 25 conference matchup over the Cornhuskers in Memorial Stadium, and Penn State coming off of a 56-0 shutout against Kent State, just doing business. And before we get down to business and talk about this game and I give you my preview, analysis, and prediction, I want you, yes you, watching right now, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts, your preview and prediction for this game down below, share this video around to any college football fans that you know, and also, if you wouldn't mind, check out my Patreon page via the link in the description and down below in the pinned comment, whatever's easiest for you. And you can also find my Discord server via the description or the pinned comment. On our Discord server, we talk about college football 24/7. And College Football with Sam prides itself on being the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. We're striving to be the best college football channel on YouTube. So we talk about college football all the time in the Discord server and, of course, on this channel. However, as many of you already know, we mainly focus on the Big Ten. So if you only want to talk about your team, well, there's a specific thread for all 18 Big Ten teams in the Discord. I encourage you to check that out. And again, like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, all those things helps you out. It helps the channel out. And just thank you very much for your support. But looking at this game here, what's fascinating is the fact that Illinois beat Kansas, they beat Nebraska, games where, I gotta be honest, I thought Kansas was going to beat Illinois. No. And now the Jayhawks are 1-3, and I see exactly why Illinois beat them. And I thought Nebraska would handle Illinois, and they didn't. Illinois is this scrappy, physical team that doesn't make mistakes, that gets the job done, and they're just efficient with what they have. They look like a Brett Bielema team. They look a lot like the 2022 team, I would say, with more offensive firepower and a little bit less defensive firepower. Penn State, meanwhile, they have clearly been explosive this year. Right now, they're top 25 in explosive play rate in passing the football. I think on about one out of every 3 of their passes is like a throw of 20 yards or more. Don't quote me on that, but I heard that from Tom Fornelli on the Cover 3 podcast. Very reliable YouTube channel. It's obvious in watching the games, whether West Virginia, Bowling Green, or Kent State, that Andy Kotelnicki has made this offense consistently explosive. However, they have not really faced a team who is as physical is Illinois. West Virginia, I think, is as physical as Illinois is on the offensive line. Not even close to Illinois' physicality on defense, though. So there are interesting facts and areas where we know that these teams are good at, but there is still a lot to learn about both the Nittany Lions and also the Fighting Illini, and we're going to do a lot of learning in this game Saturday night, which I am going to be glued to in my chair or couch or whatever the proper viewing is. Looking at this from a bird's eye view, we like to look at things from the forest, from the topographical map, and then we like to dig in and get on the ground and look at the trees and the blocks and the buildings and all the little details. But starting broad, Penn State is viewed as 19.8 points better than the average college football team in FPI, and they're viewed as 23.6 points better than the average college football team in SP+. Both of those power ratings, which are very reliable, view Penn State as a top 10 team, not quite as a top 5 team, though. I have been higher on Penn State than a lot of people have. I have them placed in my top 5, 5th, actually. But you look at the results of Penn State's games, and I completely understand why people aren't willing to buy full in on them yet. And I think this game is going to tell us a lot. It's going to tell me a lot if my view of Penn State is proper, view of Illinois is proper. And as we can see right now, per SP+, Penn State's in that tier 2. Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia are the top 5 teams. And then there's a pretty sizable drop-off from those 5. And Penn State's in that next tier. In FPI, it's a similar story with Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Georgia, a little bit of Tennessee, and then there's a drop-off, and Penn State's in that tier 2. For Illinois, they're not top 25 in power ratings. They're viewed as 5.5 points better than the average college football team in FPI and 7.6 points better than the average college football team in SP+. However, big however, a lot of these power ratings have not yet adjusted for the pace of the game and the new clock rules. A plethora of them have not, because it's hard. I mean, the clock rules are an underrated change in the game. SP Plus does a much better job than FPI, I believe. S&P Plus actually says it's a tempo adjusted power rating. So I am much more inclined to trust SP Plus than necessarily FPI, which I think looks pretty exclusively at point results, because I've seen, like Oklahoma, after they beat Temple and they didn't look good against Temple, they dramatically rose in FPI because they won by 34 points. But the big however that I wanted to mention outside of that little detail, which I think SP Plus does a brilliant job at factoring in, is that sometimes the scrappier team is the better team. And you saw that with Washington last year, for example, where they won a bunch of one-possession games, and typically that's not sustainable, but for them, it was. That's why they went 14-1. And for Iowa, similar story last year. They went 5-1 in one-possession games, and at some point, something that seems to be inconsistent or unsustainable is consistent and is sustainable, because that team is doing it over and over and over again. And Illinois has beat Kansas and Nebraska, whether winning the turnover battle against Kansas or losing it against Nebraska. They've won one-possession games against teams that at the time were viewed rather highly. And they have beaten Penn State before in Beaver Stadium, and there is an interesting physical matchup between these two teams. But when you look at explosiveness, when you look at dominance, it's Penn State by a mile. Penn State has an average points per play margin of 0.399. That means on an average points per play basis, Penn State is scoring about 0.399 or 0.4, if you just round it up, 0.001 more points per play than their opponent is per play. Illinois, meanwhile, is scoring 0.197 more points per play than their opponents are, which is factoring in that Kansas has, I think, high-octane potential in their rushing offense and a respectable defense. Nebraska has a good, great defense, could be near elite if it fixes some of its issues, and they have Dylan Raiola. That's rather impressive, I think, for Illinois. Illinois so far has faced a tougher strength of schedule than Penn State has overall. They faced the 71st toughest strength of schedule, and they're ranked 42nd in game control. Meanwhile, Penn State's played the 104th toughest strength of schedule. That's basically West Virginia and Bowling Green, who competed with A&M and also with Penn State, and they're ranked 23rd in game control. Game control does adjust for strength of schedule. It does, unlike points per play margin. I think as the season goes on, points per play margin is one of the best statistics out there in terms of who's the better team. Game control's pretty good at that too. This early, a lot of these statistics are incomplete, to say the least, because not all strength of schedules, especially this early, are created equal, and the sample sizes are no longer tiny. I'd say no longer even small relative to the scope of college football, but they're not big either. I mean, Illinois only played 4 games. They have played 33% more games than Penn State has. Is that correct, or am I very off on my statistics? They've played one more game than Penn State has, and I think that's correct. It's either 33% or 25% more. Anyway, that's not something I had written down, just something off the top of my head. But Illinois has a larger sample size. We know more about them also because they've played a tougher strength of schedule. And you look at the critical matchup. Let's dive a little bit deeper here. And I think that Illinois' defense as a whole, maybe just the front, but I think as a whole, because of how explosive this Penn State rushing attack has been, they're top 10 in rushing yards per game. They're top 10 in rushing yards per carry. Nicholas Singleton's having a pretty good bounce back year. I mean, you look at Illinois' defense this year has been impressive. I mean, number one, they intercept opponents by about 2 times per game. 1.7 to be exact. Doesn't factor in their performance against Eastern Illinois. Factors in Nebraska, Central Michigan, and also, of course, Kansas, where they had 3 interceptions. And they recover a lot of fumbles, and their average turnover margin per game is +1, which is 17th. You look at their passing defense, they allow 201.7 passing yards per game, which is 58th, and they're 40th in pass yards per attempt, 6.3, and opponent yards per completion, 10.6. And that factors in them playing Kansas, who does not have a good pass offense, and also Central Michigan, who's not good there either. A lot of that is Nebraska, a huge portion of those passing numbers for Illinois. And Nebraska doesn't have an elite passing offense, but it's pretty good, was able to exploit Illinois' secondary quite a good amount. Illinois, I think, is perhaps stronger in run defense. They allow 3.8 yards per attempt, which is 53rd, but you have to remember they played Nebraska and they played Kansas. They have Devin Neal and they have Daniel Highshaw. Devin Neal's one of the best running backs in all of the country, and Kansas ran well against West Virginia and also against Illinois. And in all of their other games, they just have a really bad passing offense and not a good enough defense to where they can turtle up, be one-dimensional, and win a lot of games. Like, let's say, Iowa can, or Michigan can, or Minnesota used to be able to, or some years at Michigan State and Ohio State back when they played trestle ball, for example. Kansas can't do that. And also Nebraska with Dante Dowdle, Ramir Johnson, Emmett Johnson, they do have a respectable offensive line and a pretty good running back room as well. So I think that Illinois' rush defense and also their defensive ends, their ability to pressure the quarterback, get into the backfield, matched up against a Penn State rushing offense that so far this season has 255 rushing yards per game, 5.9 yards per carry, which is 13th, just outside of the top 10. And their rushing play percentage, they run the ball nearly 2 out of every 3 plays, 64.18% of the time, which is top 10. Does Penn State run the football? They spoon feed Aller throws and try and get him explosive passes, and then they run the ball a whole lot. So if Illinois can control that line of scrimmage really in the ground game and force Aller to throw more, I think that's the path for victory. I think we know that Aller is going to get behind that Illinois secondary a bit and probably score some points. And I also know, given that Penn State has some injuries, like KJ Winston sadly being out for a long time, prayers up to him and hopefully he heals, and some of the inexperience at other spots in Penn State's defensive back room, that Luke Altmyer and Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin will probably also be able to get some passes off and score some points. So the two passing offenses should do fairly well against the two opposing secondaries. But in the trenches, Illinois needs to stop this Penn State rushing offense, which has been consistent and also explosive and features Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, who is a two-headed monster and makes up one of the best running back rooms in all of college football, and an interior offensive line for Penn State that features Nick Dawkins at center and Sal Wormley and Olevega Ione in the interior, both of those players at guard. So that's the key matchup in my mind. And speaking of Penn State's rushing offense, I think that running back, center, and guard, you have to give it to Penn State here. Same thing at tight end with Tyler Warren and Khalil Dinkins, Luke Reynolds, and other players in that room. And Drew Aller this year has been very impressive, along with Luke Altmyer. Let me read you the two statistics for these quarterbacks. Drew Aller, so far this season, has 8 passing touchdowns, a pick, 729 yards on 58 attempts. He's completing 70.7% of his throws, and he's averaging 12.6 yards per pass attempt. Now, he has not faced a competent pass defense. He hasn't. Those numbers, regardless, are impressive. A 218.3 passer rating. Last year against West Virginia, it looked like he could be amazing, although there were some, I think, flukish plays that went Penn State's way. This year against West Virginia, I thought he looked much better, more polished with his footwork, more comfortable in the pocket, stronger arm, just more poise and accuracy. He's replicated that through 3 games now. So we're seeing consistently Drew Aller, granted he's been spoon-fed throws, do a very good job of getting the ball to Tyler Warren, to Omari Evans, to Harrison Wallace III, to Liam Clifford, to Julian Fleming. I mean, all the players I just mentioned, all of them are averaging more than 13 yards per reception. Tyler Warren's a tight end, and he's averaging 14.1 yards per reception with 2 receiving touchdowns. And Omari Evans, Liam Clifford, and Julian Fleming are averaging more than 20 yards per reception. And Harrison Wallace is averaging 18.3. They're very explosive through the air. And as for Illinois, Altmyer has 862 passing yards. He's completing 71.4% of his passes, 8.2 yards per pass attempt, 10 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, 171.8 passer rating. He has a QBR that is 31st nationally. Drew Aller's QBR, I believe, is 5th nationally. So I got to give quarterback to Penn State, but Luke Altmyer is a great quarterback this year and is one of the better QBs in the Big Ten, much better than he was last year. And pay attention to Pat Bryant for Illinois, who has 309 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns on 20 receptions. Him and Zachary Franklin make Illinois' wide receiver core, I think, obviously better than Penn State's. And I think with J.C. Davis and some of the newness that Penn State has at offensive tackle, I do believe that I think that tackle is a position of strength for Illinois compared to Penn State. But Penn State does have talent on the offensive line. I mean, Drew Shelton and Anthony Dunco, I think, are players that are good. I just look more at Nick Dawkins, Olevega Ione, Sal Wormley, that interior offensive line that I think is very impressive. And then tight end, hopefully for Illinois, we can have Tanner Arkin healthy, but I don't know what's up with him, and I wouldn't expect him to play in this game. He may be out for the season, but I'm unsure. And Tyler Warren's an All-American caliber tight end. And then as for running back, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, they're averaging over 5 yards per carry. Singleton has 314 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 8.5 yards per carry. Illinois' leading rusher is Caden Fagan, who has 54 carries, 242 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 4.5 yards per carry. Illinois has so far this season allowed 7 sacks and is only rushing for 4.3 yards per carry. Penn State, meanwhile, has allowed 3, and they're averaging 5.9 yards per carry. Again, as for the total sacks, Illinois played tougher defenses. They've also played one more game. So the initial just raw sack numbers could be misleading. But I think Penn State overall is the much better offense, especially at running back, quarterback, and the interior offensive line and tight end. Defensively, Penn State has had some issues, I'm not going to lie. I do like Devon J. Thomas, Zane Durant, and Keziah Izzard, Alonzo Ford Jr., Hakeem Beaman, and the interior of that defensive line where 4 out of the 6 3-deep players are seniors or older. Some have a redshirt. Devon J. Thomas, redshirt senior. Zane Durant is a true junior. Both highly rated by PFF. Both have done a pretty impressive job this season. Penn State only has 4 sacks on the year, though, and that's why I give that push there. I don't really know who to pick at defensive end. As for raw talent, I would take Abdul Carter and Donnie Dennis Sutton over most defensive ends. However, they each only have a sack, and Zane Durant has a sack, and then Smith Vilbert has another. Penn State has not gotten the same amount of pressure that they did last year or even the year before with Manny Diaz. Donnie Dennis Sutton does have a forced fumble. Same with Smith Vilbert. Penn State on the season has 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 14 passes defended, and 3 interceptions. I think defensive back, specifically intercepting the ball, is where Illinois is superior. I watched Bowling Green carve up Penn State secondary. Garrett Green is a gimmick at quarterback. He's not going to pass well on you. Kent State really doesn't have a quarterback room. They're too deep at quarterback, is out for the season due to injuries. Prayers up to them, but their offense is just horrific. And Illinois on the year has 10 sacks, 7 interceptions, 3 by Xavier Scott, 2 by Miles Scott, 2 by Torrey Cox Jr. So they have some consistent players, the 2 Scotts and then Cox Jr., who've been able to intercept the ball. They each have at least 1 pass defended, and Xavier Scott and Miles Scott also have a forced fumble. Xavier Scott has a sack. I mean, the numbers that he is putting up are first team All Big Ten, perhaps All American caliber numbers if he can replicate a performance like he had against Kansas, where he had a pick 6. So their defensive backs are very impressive in my mind. Illinois are. And the reason why Penn State right now has a better defense statistically is because they're stronger on the defensive line. I think they're stronger at linebacker. They have not faced the type of schedule that Illinois has thus far. And, I mean, you look at these defenses. Aaron Henry's unit has taken a massive step forward compared to where it was last season, at least from what we know now. And Tom Allen and Penn State, I still believe they have a top 10 defense, but there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and this is a game to answer them in. I think that at D-tackle, linebacker, really the defensive front overall, Penn State has a pretty good advantage outside of maybe getting to the quarterback, but that's just one assignment of the defensive front. As for the defensive backfield, Jalen Kimber and A.J. Harris are going to have to step up in order to cover Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant. Zakee Wheatley and Jalen Reed will have to perform at a higher level in Kevin Winston Jr.'s absence. Camp Miller at the Lion position is going to have to step up. As for Illinois, Torrey Cox Jr., Miles Scott, Xavier Scott, Matthew Bailey, Caleb Patterson, I have a lot of faith in that defensive back room. And as for up front, Tayra Edwards, Gabe Jackas, Josh Kurtz, Dylan Rosiak, Seth Coleman, Alex Bray, Alec Bryant had a good performance against Nebraska. Those front players are going to have to step up to really shut down Penn State's rushing attack, or at least limit it so that Aller can have more on his shoulders to deal with, and that will play right into Illinois' hands and what they want to do on defense. As for Penn State, Tony Rose is having a great year as a true sophomore. Kobe King and Dominic DeLuca and Tyler Elston just make up a very deep linebacker room, and that defensive tackle core is deep as well. When it comes to the trenches, looking at this, going back from really specific details to the overall performance, but zoning in on key matchups, especially in the Big Ten, but special teams in the trenches matter everywhere. I'd give Penn State the edge at trenches by a long shot. I think they have the better offensive line, the better defensive line. They're not wildly better at both of those positions compared to Illinois, but they're better at both, and that gives them the better trench play. And especially at running the ball and stopping the run, Penn State is better. As for special teams, though, well, Alex Feltkins, I think, is missed by Penn State. Riley Thompson has not had an All-American, All-Big Ten caliber year quite like I thought he was going to. I think he only averaged like 30 yards per punt against Kent State. Maybe it was just an off game for him. However, Illinois has a pretty good punter, a punter that I have been impressed by. Thompson's averaging 43.5 yards per punt with 3 inside the 20. It just looks like he had an off game against Kent State where he had a long of 38, total of 71 punting yards. Hopefully he gets those numbers backed up. However, Illinois' punter, Hugh Robertson, is also good, very experienced. I think Hugh Robertson is averaging about the same yards per punt as Riley Thompson is. More importantly, though, for the Illinois Fighting Illini, they have a kicker. They actually have 2 kickers who have made it from over 50 yards. Ethan Mukzulski has made it from 59. David Alano has made it along from 50. He is 7 of 8 on field goals. 3 of 3 from the 20s, 1 of 1 from the 30s, 2 of 2 from the 40s. He's 1 of 2 from 50 plus. So he's accurate and he has a leg, which is very impressive. And the return games, from what I understand, are pretty much equal. And I think that Illinois, you just have to give them the edge at special teams mainly because of their kicker and the fact that they can get points from long distance on field goals. I don't know if Penn State can exactly do that, but maybe we'll figure out in this game. And as for the coaching staff, I'd give Penn State the offense, the defense, strength and conditioning. I think that Andy Kotelnicki is the best offensive coordinator in the country. I think that Terry Smith is a legendary secondary coach. Anthony Poindexter is good with the safeties. Tom Allen, I think, is a good DC. Aaron Henry, I also think, is a good defensive coordinator, but I think assistant coaching on defense goes to Penn State. And Chuck Losey is one of the better strength and conditioning coaches in all of college football. As for head coaching, Brett Bielema and James Franklin both have a reputation of not always managing the game right. So that's why I give them a push there. There's an argument, I think, for James Franklin to be the better head coach, and many would say he's the better head coach than Brett Bielema. But when you take out recruiting and the fact that Penn State's recruited way better than Illinois, part of that's branding. I think most of that's due to the assistant coaches and the fact that Penn State's better at assistant coach than Illinois is. Just look at development for college. Look at game execution. Look at expectations and do they over or underachieve. I think these coaches are very much in the same boat. If you put a gun to my head, I'd go with James Franklin here, but it's pretty close. And in big games in particular, where neither team is underestimated, both of these coaches have let their teams and fan bases down before. So I give a push to head coach, but overall, coaching, I lean towards Penn State. Really, in this game, I think it's pretty simple. Penn State is better offensively. They're slightly better on defense, could be very much better on defense. I'm just looking what I've seen so far this season. And it's a whiteout game, a wannabe whiteout game. They'll have the true whiteout game later this season. And it's at home. And Penn State has the better coaching staff, the better athletes, the better quarterback, the better lines of scrimmage. I look at it and I think while Illinois will be able to maybe make it a game for 2 quarters, maybe 3, but I'd lean more toward a quarter and a half or so. I think Penn State will get enough explosive plays and have enough consistency from their ground game and defense to really begin to pull away. And you know that James Franklin and Penn State, they're going to want to pile it on because they always do. They're known for running up the score, and now they have the coordinator and the personnel and the quarterback to be quick, to be explosive, and they have the explosiveness on defense is something they've always had. They've never not had that. They just lacked it on offense, and now they have it. So while I think Illinois is a good team, and I think they're well coached, and they may hang in here, and I can see a scenario where Illinois plays competitively, maybe wins, but if they win, it's going to be like another overtime game or a field goal type win. That's one extreme. The other extreme is Penn State wins by 30 points or perhaps even more. I do think Penn State is that much better of a team than Illinois. The middle between the two extremes, which is typically what happens in life and in college football, is the middle between the two most extreme outcomes, between the outliers. I think it's Penn State winning by about the point spread, but by 21 or 24 more than, 17, 18, 19, or 20 points. So Penn State covers, and I have them winning 38-17. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor Little OH, Ismar, Tyler 9, Jilton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, guys. Make sure to check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day. Go Fighting Illini, and go Nittany Lions.